The stranger did not call for help. That was what frightened Eliza Bennett most. Men who still believed rescue was coming usually shouted, fired a pistol, or dragged themselves toward the road. This man had done none of those things. He lay face down beside the northern fence of Bennett Ranch, one hand pressed into the wet earth and the other resting against a cedar post stained with blood. Above him, the morning sky stretched gray and heavy over the Wyoming plains. Eliza drew back on the reins. Her mare, Maple, stopped so quickly that mud splashed across Eliza's boots. The horse lifted her head and stared toward the cottonwoods lining the creek. A dark gelding stood there, with loose reins hanging from its neck. The animal was soaked from the night's storm. Its saddle sat crooked, and one stirrup had twisted beneath its belly. Still, it had not wandered away. It watched the fallen rider with the patient fear of a creature that understood something was wrong but could not fix it. Eliza reached for the rifle resting beside her saddle. "Easy," she whispered to Maple. The mare shifted beneath her. No movement came from the grass. Eliza studied the open land around them. The northern pasture rolled empty toward the hills. Her father and the ranch hands had driven most of the cattle west before the storm. The nearest neighbor lived 6 miles away. The town of Dry River was farther still. No one would hear her if the stranger woke with bad intentions. But he did not look capable of standing, much less harming her. Eliza climbed down. Her boots sank into the wet ground as she approached. She kept the rifle in one hand and pushed loose brown hair away from her face with the other. The man was young, perhaps 30. Mud covered one side of his coat. A cut crossed his temple and dried blood had darkened the collar of his shirt. His breathing came shallow and uneven. Eliza knelt beside him. "Sir?" No response. She placed 2 fingers against his neck. His pulse was weak. His skin felt cold, though fever burned beneath it. Eliza looked toward the road, then back at the injured man. Her father's voice returned to her from years ago. "Never trust a quiet trail, Lizzie. Trouble often waits where a person feels safest." Her father, Gideon Bennett, trusted almost no one. He trusted the land because it gave clear warnings. He trusted horses because they did not smile before betraying a man. He trusted Eliza because she was his daughter. Everyone else had to earn it. Eliza turned the stranger carefully onto his back. His face tightened with pain, but his eyes remained closed. His right shoulder sat lower than the left. Not broken, she thought, but badly injured. There was also a dark bruise beneath his ribs. He had likely been thrown during the storm. She searched his coat for a weapon and found a revolver still secured in its holster. The leather strap remained fastened. That eased her fear slightly. A violent man fleeing danger would not usually leave his gun tied down. The gelding gave a low nicker from the creek. Eliza rose and approached it. "Your rider has made a fine mess for both of us." The horse watched her closely, but allowed her to take the reins. She checked the saddle for blood, wondering whether the stranger had been dragged. The leather was scarred from use but well cared for. A bedroll had come loose behind the cantle. One saddlebag hung open, showing a coil of rope, a tin cup, and a folded shirt. Nothing unusual. Then the wet saddle flap slipped beneath Eliza's hand. A brand had been burned into the leather. A black wolf standing beneath a crooked cross. Eliza stopped breathing. For several seconds, the wind and creek seemed to disappear. She knew that mark. Every Bennett knew it. The black wolf brand belonged to the Mercer family. Her father had once ordered a ranch hand dismissed for purchasing a horse that carried it. He had cut the mark from an old gate where someone had carved it as a cruel joke. He refused to ride south of the abandoned stone bridge because Mercer land began beyond it. Eliza had grown up hearing that name only when Gideon was angry or drunk enough to forget his silence. Mercer, the family he blamed for the night fire, took Eliza's mother and younger brother 19 years earlier. Her fingers tightened around the saddle leather. She looked back at the wounded stranger. He was too young to have started the feud. He might have been a boy when the Bennett barn burned. That did not make him innocent. A man did not ride beneath the black wolf brand by accident. The gelding nudged her shoulder. The gesture was soft, almost pleading. Eliza closed her eyes. She could ride to Dry River and send the doctor. The journey there and back would take hours. The stranger might be dead before they returned. She could leave him where he lay and tell herself he belonged to the family that had destroyed hers. The thought lasted only a moment. Her mother had taught her better before death turned kindness into something rarely spoken inside the Bennett home. Eliza returned to the injured man. "You chose the worst fence in Wyoming to fall beside," she said quietly. He did not answer. She lowered her rifle. "Lucky for you, I am not my father." It took nearly an hour to move him. Eliza tied a blanket across Maple's saddle and lifted the stranger carefully with the help of a fence rail. He was heavier than she expected. Twice his boots dragged through the mud. Once his head fell against her shoulder, and she nearly lost her footing. By the time he was secured across the saddle, her hands trembled and sweat cooled beneath her coat, despite the cold wind. She led Maple with one hand and the dark gelding with the other. She did not take him to the main house. Instead, she brought him to an old shepherd's cabin near the North Creek. Her father used it during lambing season years ago, before cattle replaced most of the sheep. It stood hidden behind cottonwoods, far enough from the ranch house that a person could stay there without being seen from the main road. The cabin smelled of dust, old smoke, and damp wood. Eliza pushed open the door with her shoulder and guided Maple beside the narrow porch. Getting the stranger inside was worse than lifting him from the grass. He groaned when she lowered him onto the cot. His eyes opened for half a second. They were deep hazel, clouded with pain. "Where?" he whispered. "Bennett land." The moment the name left her mouth, something changed in his expression. Fear. Recognition. Then his eyes closed again. Eliza noticed. She removed his wet coat and cut the torn shirt away from his shoulder. The joint had slipped partly out of place. Her father had shown her how to reset a shoulder after a ranch hand fell beneath a horse, but knowing how did not make the task gentle. She wrapped a strip of leather between the stranger's teeth. "This will hurt." He did not seem awake enough to understand. Eliza braced his arm, pulled carefully, and shifted the joint. A dull movement sounded beneath the skin. The stranger jerked awake with a strangled cry. His good hand closed around Eliza's wrist. For one sharp moment, his eyes locked on hers. "Don't," he gasped. "It is done." He stared at her, breathing hard. His grip loosened. "Horse," he whispered. "Your gelding is outside. Name is Cole. He has water." The tension in his face eased. "Good." His eyes closed again. Eliza sat back on her heels. A man near death, and his first clear concern was for his horse. That detail troubled her because it made him harder to hate. She cleaned the cut above his temple, wrapped his ribs, and covered him with 2 blankets. Then she lit the stove and boiled water with willow bark and dried mint. Rain began again before noon. It tapped lightly against the roof, then grew stronger until the cabin seemed surrounded by the storm. Eliza stayed. She told herself she remained because his fever was rising, because leaving an unconscious stranger near a fire would be foolish, because her father would not return from the western range until the following evening. None of those reasons explained why she kept looking at the saddle beneath the lean-to. The Black Wolf brand showed dark against the wet leather. At sunset, the stranger began shaking. Eliza placed a cool cloth against his neck and held the cup to his lips. Most of the tea ran into his beard, but he swallowed enough to quiet the worst of the fever. Night settled over the creek. The lantern flame moved each time wind found a crack in the cabin wall. Cole shifted outside, his hooves knocking softly against the boards. Near midnight, the stranger spoke. At first, Eliza could not understand him. Then he said a name. "Daniel." His voice broke around it. Eliza leaned closer. "Who is Daniel?" The stranger's face twisted with grief. "I tried." His fingers tightened around the blanket. I could not get him out. Eliza froze. The storm pressed hard against the roof. The old fire returned to her mind, the barn burning beneath a black sky, her father carrying her away while she screamed for her mother, the small grave beside her mother's where her brother Samuel had been buried. I could not get him out. Eliza stared at the stranger. "Who are you?" she whispered. He did not answer. The fever held him until the darkest hour before dawn. When morning finally came, pale light entered through the dirty window. The rain had stopped. Mist floated over the creek and drops fell slowly from the cottonwood leaves. Eliza had fallen asleep in the chair with the rifle across her lap. A small sound woke her. The stranger was watching her. He looked weak, but the fever had broken. His eyes were clear now. Eliza straightened. "You are alive." "So it appears." His voice was rough but steady. She poured water into a cup. He tried to take it with his injured arm and immediately winced. "Use the other hand," she said. He obeyed. After drinking, he studied the cabin. "How long?" "One night and most of yesterday." "You found me." "By my northern fence." His gaze moved to the rifle. Then to her face. "You know my saddle." It was not a question. Eliza's hand tightened around the chair arm. "I saw the brand." He lowered the cup slowly. Outside, Cole gave a soft nicker. The man closed his eyes for a moment, as though preparing himself for a blow he had expected for years. "My name is Jonah Mercer." The cabin seemed colder. Eliza stood. She had heard the name before. Not Jonah, but Mercer. Her father had spoken it like a curse. "You are Everett Mercer's son." Jonah looked at her carefully. "Yes." Eliza stepped toward the door. "Then you need to leave." "I cannot sit a horse." "That is not my concern." "It was yesterday." The words stopped her. She turned. Jonah did not look proud or threatening. He looked tired. There was no mockery in his expression. Only truth. Eliza's jaw tightened. "You were dying yesterday. And today. Today I know who you are." Jonah looked toward the weak fire. "No," he said quietly, "you know my name." Eliza stared at him. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then Jonah reached slowly toward the inside pocket of his ruined coat, hanging beside the stove. Eliza raised the rifle. "Keep your hand where I can see it." "It is not a weapon." "Then say what it is." "A letter." He used his left hand to pull out a small folded paper stained by rain. He placed it on the blanket. "It is why I was near your fence." Eliza did not move. Jonah pushed the paper toward the edge of the cot. "I found it hidden in my father's desk. It was written 19 years ago." "By whom?" His eyes met hers. "Your mother's." The silence that followed felt larger than the cabin. Eliza's rifle lowered by an inch. "My mother died 19 years ago." "I know." "She never wrote to the Mercers." Jonah looked at the folded letter between them. "That is what both our fathers wanted us to believe." A horse suddenly thundered along the distant trail. Eliza moved to the window. A rider crossed the ridge, heading toward the Bennett ranch house. She recognized the wide shoulders and gray hat immediately. Her father had returned early. Gideon Bennett was less than a mile away. And hidden in the cabin behind Eliza lay the wounded son of the man he had hated for nearly 2 decades, carrying a letter that might prove the story of the fire had never been true. Eliza looked back at Jonah. For the first time since finding him, genuine fear showed in his face. Outside, her father's horse turned from the main trail. He was no longer riding toward the house. He was following the fresh tracks leading directly to the cabin. Gideon Bennett rode toward the cabin with the hard, direct purpose of a man who had already decided something was wrong. Eliza watched through the dirty window as his gray gelding crossed the wet pasture. The horse's hooves struck the soft ground in a steady rhythm. Gideon did not call out. He did not slow when he saw Cole tied beneath the lean-to. His gaze moved from the unfamiliar horse to the dark saddle hanging near the wall. Then he saw the black wolf brand. Even from inside the cabin, Eliza saw his body stiffen. Jonah tried to rise from the cot. Pain took the strength from his face before he had lifted himself halfway. "Stay down," Eliza said. "If he finds me lying here, he may think worse. He will think worse no matter how he finds you." The words came sharper than she intended. Jonah lowered himself again, breathing carefully. Outside, Gideon dismounted. His boots struck the ground. For one brief second, Eliza considered hiding the saddle. The thought shamed her as soon as it came. Her father had built his entire life around the belief that truth mattered more than comfort. Hiding Jonah would only make the moment more dangerous. She set the rifle against the wall and moved toward the door. Before she reached it, Gideon opened it from the other side. Cold morning air swept into the cabin. He filled the doorway in his mud-streaked coat, gray hat pulled low over his brow. His face looked older than it had when he left for the western range. Dust and rain had settled into the deep lines beside his mouth. His eyes found Eliza first. Then Jonah. Everything inside Gideon went still. Eliza. She had heard her name spoken in anger before. This was different. The quiet in his voice carried something more dangerous than shouting. "Papa." His gaze returned to Jonah. "Who is he?" Jonah pushed himself upright against the wall despite the pain. "My name is Jonah Mercer, sir." Gideon's hand moved toward the revolver at his hip. Eliza stepped between them. "Do not." Her father looked at her as if she had spoken in a language he did not know. "Move aside. He is injured. He is a Mercer. He was dying beside our fence." Gideon took one step inside. The cabin seemed too small to hold the hatred that entered with him. "You brought him onto Bennett land. I brought a wounded man into an empty cabin. You knew the brand. Not until after I found him. And after you knew." Eliza's throat tightened. "I stayed." Her father stared at her. Behind him, wind moved through the cottonwoods. Cole shifted beneath the lean-to, pulling once against his reins. Gideon looked toward the saddle. The black wolf brand showed clearly. 19 years of silence passed across his face in a single breath. "You should have ridden to town. He would have died before the doctor returned. Then that would have been between him and God." Eliza flinched. Her father saw it. For a moment, regret touched his eyes. It disappeared beneath anger before it could become an apology. Jonah spoke quietly. "She saved my life. None of this is her fault." Gideon turned on him. "You do not speak for my daughter." "No, sir." "Do not call me sir." Jonah lowered his gaze. Eliza could feel her father's anger searching for somewhere to land. She reached toward the cot and picked up the folded letter. "He had this." Gideon did not look at it. "I do not care what he carries." "You will." "Eliza." It was written by Mama. The name changed the room. Gideon's hand left the revolver. His eyes moved to the paper in Eliza's fingers. "What did you say?" Jonah found it in Everett Mercer's desk. Gideon's face lost some of its color. "That is a lie. I have not opened it yet." "Then burn it." Eliza stared at him. Jonah did the same. Her father seemed to hear his own words only after they were spoken. He looked toward the stove, then back to the letter. "No," Eliza said. Gideon's jaw tightened. "You do not know what that family did." "That is exactly the trouble. I only know what you told me." "I told you enough. You told me the fire began because Everett Mercer came to steal water rights and threatened you. You told me Mama and Samuel died because of him." They did. Then why would she write to him? She would not. Gideon stepped closer. The old floorboards creaked beneath his weight. Give me the paper. Eliza held it against her coat. No. The answer surprised both of them. Gideon's expression hardened. I am your father. And she was my mother. Silence followed. Jonah looked away, giving them what little privacy the cabin could offer. Gideon's eyes narrowed. You think one letter changes 19 years? I think you are afraid it might. His face changed. Not with guilt. With pain. A deep, unguarded pain Eliza had seen only once before, at her mother's grave. Gideon turned toward the window. His shoulders rose and fell with one slow breath. At last he said, "Read it." Eliza hesitated. The paper was sealed with wax that had cracked years ago. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting struck her first. Rounded letters. A slight curve in the final stroke of every word. She had seen the same hand in an old recipe book tucked in the kitchen cupboard. Her mother's handwriting. Eliza swallowed and began. Everett, Gideon still believes you plan to close the Southern Channel after winter. I told him you agreed to shared access, but pride has made both of you deaf. Meet me at the stone bridge tomorrow after sundown. Bring the signed agreement. I will bring Gideon if I can persuade him. No more threats. No more men carrying rifles over water that belongs to the earth before it belongs to any of us. Eliza stopped. The cabin felt very quiet. Gideon stared at the letter. His mouth moved once, but no words came. Jonah watched him carefully. Eliza continued. Daniel is still asking when he may ride the black pony. Samuel says he is too small, though Samuel is hardly larger. They have become friends despite everything their fathers have done. Perhaps children see more clearly because they have not yet learned where hatred is expected. The paper trembled in Eliza's hand. Daniel. The name Jonah had spoken during the fever. She looked at him. Who was Daniel? Jonah's face tightened. My younger brother. Gideon turned slowly. You had 2 children there. Jonah answered before correcting himself. My father did. Sarah was my sister. Daniel was 6. Eliza looked back at the letter. Her own brother, Samuel, had been 7. The 2 boys had known each other. They had been friends. Her father had never told her. She finished reading. If we can settle this quietly, perhaps the children will inherit land instead of anger. Rose. No one spoke for several moments. The stove popped. A log shifted inside. Gideon reached for the wall to steady himself. Eliza watched the certainty he had carried for 19 years begin to crack. You knew about the agreement? She asked. No. His voice sounded distant. You knew Mama met Everett Mercer? No. You knew Samuel played with Daniel? Gideon closed his eyes. No. Jonah looked toward the floor. My father never told me either. Gideon opened his eyes and focused on him. Why did you come here? Jonah took a careful breath. Because I found that letter with a second one. The second was not from Mrs. Bennett. Who wrote it? My father. Where is it? I lost it during the storm. Gideon's expression darkened again. Convenient. I remember most of it. Then speak. Jonah shifted against the cot, pain tightening his jaw. He wrote that the agreement was signed. He wrote that he reached the stone bridge, but Mrs. Bennett never came. Then he heard the fire bell from the ranch. Gideon stared. There was no fire bell. Jonah frowned. What? Our bell had broken that summer. The words changed something in Jonah's face. You are certain? I took it down myself. Eliza looked from one man to the other. Then what did Everett hear? Gideon did not answer. Outside, a gust struck the cabin, sending water from the roof edge onto the porch. Jonah spoke slowly. My father wrote that someone rang metal near the south pasture. He thought it was the Bennett bell. He rode toward the sound and saw flames at the barn. Gideon stepped closer. What else? He found my father. Jonah shook his head. He found your mother near the side door. She was trying to reach the children. Eliza's breath caught. Gideon's face went rigid. Samuel was inside. Jonah looked at him. So were Daniel and Sarah. The old story shifted again. 3 children. Not one. Gideon turned away, so quickly the chair near the wall fell beneath his hand. Eliza reached for him. He pulled back. Not in anger, because he could not bear being touched. Jonah continued quietly. My father wrote that the doors had been barred from the outside. Gideon looked over his shoulder. That is impossible. He broke one bar loose. No. He entered through the side. No. He carried Sarah out. Gideon's voice rose. No. The word struck the walls. Cole startled outside. Eliza stood frozen. Gideon pointed at Jonah. Your father started that fire. I saw him near the barn with his coat burned. I saw his horse tied by the south gate. He ran before the sheriff arrived. Jonah's expression hardened for the first time. My father was burned because he went inside. He ran because he was guilty. He ran because Daniel was still missing. Gideon stopped. Jonah's voice lowered. He searched the creek until sunrise. He believed the boy had escaped. They found Daniel's buckle in the ashes 3 days later. The anger drained from Gideon's face. Eliza pressed the letter to her chest. Who barred the doors? She asked. Neither man answered. Then Gideon spoke. There was someone else near the barn that night. Eliza looked at him. Who? Her father stared at the open doorway, seeing a place 19 years away. Silas Boone. The name landed heavily. Eliza thought of the neighbor who visited every Christmas, the man who brought flour during hard winters, the man who had once taught her to throw a rope, the man who repeated the Mercer story more eagerly than anyone in Dry River. What was he doing there? She asked. He said he came after seeing smoke. Did you see him before the fire? Gideon did not answer quickly enough. Eliza understood. You did. Her father lowered his head. Rose had argued with him earlier that week. About what? The water agreement. Jonah watched closely. Why would Boone care? Gideon looked toward the window. Because the disputed creek did not only touch Bennett and Mercer land, it crossed the corner of Boone's winter pasture. Eliza felt cold despite the stove. If the agreement passed, he would lose control of the southern channel. He would lose the money he collected from smaller ranchers who watered there. Jonah's eyes sharpened. My father wrote that someone had moved the marker stones before the fire. Gideon turned. What marker stones? The boundary markers beside the bridge. Gideon's face changed again. Silas Boone had helped replace those stones after the fire. He had claimed the flood washed them away. Eliza saw the realization reach her father. Boone had been part of every story, every warning, every accusation, every year of hatred. A horse called from beyond the trees. Not Cole. Another horse. Then came the slow creak of saddle leather. Eliza moved toward the window. A rider sat at the edge of the cottonwoods. Wide shoulders, brown coat, a pale gelding. Silas Boone. He had stopped far enough from the cabin to pretend he had only happened upon them, but close enough to have heard raised voices. Gideon followed Eliza's gaze. Silas lifted one hand in greeting. His smile looked ordinary. That frightened Eliza more than anger would have. He rode closer. Morning, Gideon, he called. Saw your tracks, thought you might need help. His eyes moved toward the open cabin door. Then he saw Jonah. The smile vanished. Silas dismounted slowly. "Well," he said, "that explains the Mercer horse." Gideon stepped onto the porch. "What are you doing here?" Silas glanced at Eliza. "Looking after neighbors." "No one sent for you." "No, but word travels." Eliza looked down the empty trail. No one else knew Jonah was there. Silas had not followed gossip. He had followed tracks. Or watched the ranch. His eyes found the letter in Eliza's hand. Something cold moved through his expression. "What is that?" Eliza folded the paper. "Something my mother wrote." Silas went still. Only for a second. Then the friendly look returned. "Rose wrote many things. This one mentions the water agreement." Gideon studied him. Silas's gaze shifted between them. "The old dispute is dead." "3 children and my wife died because of it," Gideon said. "Nothing about that is dead." Silas took a slow breath. "You have a Mercer under your roof, and suddenly you are questioning everything." "No," Eliza said, "the letter did that." Silas looked at her. The kindness left his face. "You should be careful, girl." Gideon stepped between them. "She is not a girl." Silas raised both hands. "I meant no insult." Jonah appeared in the doorway behind Eliza, one hand braced against the frame. His face was pale from the effort. "Did you move the boundary stones?" Silas looked at him. "Get back inside." "Did you?" "That is Mercer business." It became Bennett business when a barn burned. Silas's jaw tightened. Gideon saw it. "So did you move them?" Silas laughed once. A short, empty sound. "You are letting grief make a fool of you again." "Again?" Eliza saw her father react. Silas realized his mistake too late. Gideon stepped off the porch. "What did you mean by that?" Silas moved one hand near his coat. Eliza saw it. So did Jonah. "Papa," she warned. Gideon stopped. Silas looked from one face to another and understood the cabin no longer belonged to the old story. "You want truth," he said. His voice had changed. "No," Eliza answered, "we want yours." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Silas smiled. It was not friendly now. It was tired. "You should have burned that letter," he said. Gideon's face went pale. Silas stepped backward toward his horse. Jonah moved from the doorway. Pain bent him, but he stayed upright. "What happened that night?" Silas reached the saddle. His hand closed around the horn. "You think one fire began all this?" he asked. "The fire only finished what pride had already built." He pulled himself into the saddle. Gideon reached for his revolver. Silas drew first. The pistol came free, but he did not fire. He pointed it toward the cabin. Toward Eliza. Gideon froze. Silas's eyes locked on the letter in her hand. "Put it in the stove." Eliza's fingers tightened around the paper. "No." "Do it." Her hand trembled, but she did not move. Silas's voice lowered. "That paper has already killed enough people." Jonah looked at him. "No, you have." Silas turned the pistol toward Jonah. The movement lasted only a second. Gideon lunged. A shot cracked across the creek. Cole reared beneath the lean-to. Eliza dropped to the ground. Silas's horse spun hard as Gideon struck his arm. The bullet tore into the cabin roof. Jonah came forward, but his injured shoulder failed him. He fell against the porch rail. Silas kicked free and rode toward the cottonwoods. Gideon fired once into the air. "Stop." Silas did not. He disappeared through the trees, leaving mud and broken grass behind him. For several seconds, The valley held only the echo of the gunshot. Then Eliza rose. Her father stood in the yard, revolver lowered, staring after the rider he had trusted for 19 years. Jonah sat against the porch post, one hand pressed to his shoulder. Eliza ran to him. His bandage had darkened with fresh blood. "I am fine," he said through clenched teeth. "You are not." Gideon turned back. He looked at Jonah, then at Eliza, then at the letter still safe in her hand. His expression had changed. The anger remained. But now it had direction. "Boone is heading south," he said. Jonah forced himself upright. "My father's ranch." Eliza looked at him. "Why?" "Because if Silas knows one letter survived, he will assume Everett kept more." Gideon holstered his revolver. "Can you ride?" Jonah looked toward Cole. "Yes." Eliza stood between them. "No, his shoulder has opened again. If Boone reaches my father first, the shoulder will not matter." Gideon studied Jonah. For the first time, he did not look at him as a mercer. He looked at him as a son afraid for his father. Gideon crossed to the gray gelding. Eliza saddled Maple. She stared at him. "You are taking me." "I already lost too many years deciding what you should not know." Jonah reached for Cole's reins. Gideon stopped beside him. "If your father lied, then I will hear it from him. And if Boone reaches him first." Jonah's face hardened. Then the last witness to that night may die with the truth still locked inside him. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Far to the south, a rider crossed the open ridge at full speed. Silas Boone was heading toward Mercer land. And for the first time in 19 years, a Bennett and a Mercer prepared to ride the same trail for the same reason. They left the cabin within minutes. Gideon rode first on the gray gelding, pushing the animal hard toward the southern ridge. Eliza followed on Maple. Jonah came behind them on Cole, his injured arm tied close against his body and his face pale beneath the morning sun. The ground was still soft from the storm. Mud pulled at the horses' hooves as they crossed the creek and climbed toward the open grassland. Ahead, Silas Boone was no longer visible, but his horse's tracks cut deep through the wet earth. Gideon followed them without hesitation. Eliza watched her father's back. He had ridden toward danger before. She had seen him chase wolves from the calving pasture and cross a flooded creek to save trapped cattle. But this was different. Every mile south carried him closer to a truth he had spent 19 years refusing to question. The wind pulled at his coat. He did not look back. Jonah's horse drew even with Eliza. "You should not have come," he said. "Neither should you. My father may be in danger. And mine has trusted Silas Boone for most of my life." Jonah looked toward Gideon. "He trusts him no longer. That does not erase what it costs to stop." Cole stumbled slightly on uneven ground. Jonah tightened his good hand on the reins. Pain crossed his face. Eliza slowed Maple. "Your bandage is bleeding again." "It can wait." "No." "Eliza." The sound of her name in his voice stopped her for half a breath. He had never spoken it so directly before. "Not Miss Bennett." "Not ma'am." "Eliza." Jonah looked at her. "If Boone reaches my father before we do, a clean bandage will not matter." She wanted to argue. Instead, she reached across the space between the horses and tightened the loose knot holding his arm against his ribs. Her fingers brushed the edge of his coat. Jonah held still. "Do not mistake this for agreement," she said. "I would not dare." Despite everything, the faintest smile touched his mouth. Then Gideon raised one hand ahead of them. They stopped at the crest of the ridge. Below lay Mercer Valley. The land was greener than Bennett pasture, fed by the creek that curved along the southern hills. A long barn stood near a weathered ranch house. Two smaller cabins sat beyond it. Black wolf brands marked the gateposts. Eliza had seen the ranch only from a distance. Her father had always turned away before reaching this ridge. Now he stared down at it in silence. The place looked ordinary. That disturbed her. For 19 years, Mercer Land had lived in her imagination as something dark and hostile. Yet smoke rose peacefully from the chimney. Chickens moved near the barn. Laundry shifted on a line behind the house. Hatred had built a monster from a working ranch. Gideon looked toward the road. Silas Boone's tracks led directly to the house. "He is there," Jonah said. A horse stood tied beside the porch. Pale gelding. Silas's horse. Jonah urged Cole forward. Gideon caught his reins. "Not alone. My father is inside. And Boone has a gun." Jonah's jaw tightened. Gideon held his gaze. "You want to help him, then stop riding like grief has made you bulletproof." For a moment, Jonah looked ready to pull away. Then he nodded. The three riders descended together. As they neared the gate, a ranch hand stepped from the barn with a pitchfork in one hand. He was thin, gray-haired, and immediately suspicious. Then he recognized Jonah. "Mr. Jonah, where is my father?" The ranch hand glanced toward the house. "Inside, Mr. Boone came not 10 minutes ago." "Did he have business?" "Said it was private." Jonah dismounted too quickly. His boots hit the ground, and his injured shoulder dragged him sideways. Eliza caught his coat before he fell. The ranch hand stared at Gideon. "Who is this?" "Gideon Bennett," Jonah said. The old man's face tightened. Gideon ignored him. "Is there another entrance?" "Kitchen door behind the house." Gideon turned to Eliza. "Stay here." She stared at him. "No. Eliza, you brought me because you said I deserved to know. I brought you because leaving you alone at the cabin was no longer safe." "That is not what you said." "It is what I mean now." Before she could answer, a crash sounded inside the ranch house. Glass shattered. Then came a voice. "Old. Angry. Get out of my home." Jonah moved toward the porch. Gideon followed. Eliza did not stay behind. They entered through the front door. The room smelled of tobacco, coffee, and old wood. A chair lay overturned beside the table. Broken glass covered the floor near the window. Everett Mercer stood beside the stone fireplace. He was taller than Eliza expected, though age had bent his shoulders. White hair fell across his forehead. One hand gripped the mantel while the other held a small iron poker. Silas Boone stood across from him, with a revolver aimed at his chest. Everett looked past Silas. His gaze found Jonah first. "Son." Then Gideon stepped through the doorway. Everett's expression changed. 19 years passed silently between the two men. Silas turned just enough to see them. His gun remained pointed at Everett. "You should have stayed north," he said. Gideon moved slightly in front of Eliza. "You should have kept riding." Silas laughed without humor. "Always quick to choose the wrong man, Gideon." "You made that easy." Everett lowered the poker. His eyes moved to Eliza. For one strange moment, sorrow softened his face. "You look like Rose." Eliza's breath caught. Gideon stiffened beside her. Silas glanced toward a wooden desk near the wall. Every drawer had been pulled open. Papers covered the floor. A small metal box sat on the table, its lock broken. "You came for the letters," Jonah said. Silas looked at him. "I came to end a mistake." "You mean evidence?" "I mean old lies that will do nothing but tear open graves." Everett's voice was rough. "The lies were yours." Silas turned the revolver slightly. "Careful." Everett did not move. "I have been careful for 19 years. It did not make me innocent." Gideon looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" Everett closed his eyes. Silas smiled. "There, hear that. Even now he cannot tell you cleanly." Tell me what? Gideon asked. Everett opened his eyes again. The fire did not begin the way either of us believed. Gideon took one step forward. Silas aimed the gun at him. Stay where you are. Gideon stopped. Everett looked toward the scattered papers. Rose came to me 3 days before the fire. She said you were ready to consider the water agreement. I was not. She believed you might be. Gideon's mouth tightened. She always believed better of me than I deserved. Everett's face broke slightly at the words. Yes. The answer carried a shared grief neither man had expected. Silas's grip on the revolver tightened. This is sentimental nonsense. Eliza looked at him. You barred the barn doors. Silas's eyes moved to her. I did no such thing. Jonah's father wrote that they were barred from outside. Then Jonah's father lied. Everett spoke. He did not write it. Everyone turned toward him. Jonah frowned. What? Everett looked at his son. The letter you found was not mine. Jonah went still. I know your handwriting. You know the hand I use for ranch books. Everett looked at Silas. The letter was copied. Silas's face changed. Only slightly. But enough. Gideon saw it. Copied by whom? Everett answered. Rose. Eliza stared at him. My mother wrote the second letter. She copied my account after the fire began. Silas shook his head. Old man, you are confused. Everett ignored him. Rose knew something was wrong before the flames rose. She had seen Boone moving the boundary stones near the southern channel. She confronted him beside the barn. Gideon looked at Silas. You were there before the fire. Silas's jaw tightened. Everett continued. Rose had brought the signed agreement. Samuel came with her. Daniel and Sarah followed me from the Mercer house. Jonah closed his eyes briefly. Everett's voice weakened, but he did not stop. The children went into the barn to see the black pony. Rose and I argued about whether to wait for Gideon. Then Boone arrived. Silas raised the revolver. That is enough. Everett looked at him. You told Rose the agreement would ruin you. Without control of the channel, the smaller ranchers would stop paying you. Silas's face hardened. You have no proof. Everett nodded toward the broken metal box. You came because you know I do. Everyone looked at the papers. Silas moved closer to the table. Jonah took one step toward him. The gun swung in his direction. Eliza's heart pounded. Gideon said quietly, Where is the proof? Everett's eyes met Eliza's. Not in the box. Silas froze. Everett looked toward the fireplace. Rose hid it. Silas followed his gaze. A loose stone sat beside the mantel. He moved quickly. Gideon reached for his revolver. Silas fired. The shot struck the wall near Gideon's shoulder, sending wood splinters into the air. Eliza ducked. Jonah lunged at Silas from the side. They collided against the table. The revolver fell. Silas drove an elbow into Jonah's injured shoulder. Jonah cried out and collapsed. Gideon rushed forward. Silas struck him with the broken lockbox, knocking him against the wall. Everett lifted the iron poker. Silas turned and kicked the old man's cane away. Everett fell beside the fireplace. Eliza saw the gun on the floor. So did Silas. They moved at the same time. Eliza reached it first. Her hand closed around the grip. She stood and aimed. Silas stopped. The room went silent except for Jonah's harsh breathing. Eliza had fired rifles at wolves and coyotes. She had never pointed a pistol at a man. Her hand trembled. Silas noticed. You will not shoot me. Step away from them. You are Rose Bennett's daughter. Yes. She could not do what needed doing either. Gideon pushed himself upright. Eliza, keep it on him. Silas smiled. She has her mother's heart. That is why she will fail. Eliza steadied the pistol with both hands. You mistook kindness for weakness once already. The smile faded. Move away from the fireplace. Silas obeyed slowly. Jonah sat against the overturned table, one hand gripping his shoulder. Blood had spread across the bandage. Gideon crossed the room and took Silas's own revolver from the floor. Now we listen, he said. Everett tried to rise. Eliza helped him sit beside the hearth. The old man pointed toward the loose stone. Behind it, Gideon removed the stone. Inside the narrow space lay a tin cylinder wrapped in scorched cloth. He pulled it out. The fabric crumbled at the edges. Silas looked toward the door. Eliza raised the pistol higher. Do not. Gideon opened the cylinder. Inside were 3 folded papers and a small brass key. One page carried a county seal. Another bore several signatures. The third was written in Rose Bennett's hand. Gideon unfolded the signed document first. It was the water agreement. Everett Mercer had agreed to shared use of the Southern Channel. Gideon's name had a blank line beneath it. Silas Boone's name appeared at the bottom. Not as a witness, as a claimant. Gideon read the final paragraph. If Bennett and Mercer establish shared access, the Boone lease over the lower channel becomes invalid. Eliza looked at Silas. You would have lost everything. No. His voice came quickly. Only the lease. The lease that made ranchers pay you for water. They paid for protection. Everett gave a bitter laugh. They paid because you moved markers and told them the channel belonged to you. Gideon opened Rose's statement. His hands began to shake before he read the second line. Eliza watched his face change. What does it say? She asked. He could not speak. He handed the page to her. Eliza read aloud. I saw Silas Boone place a chain through the barn handles after the children entered. When I demanded he remove it, he said no agreement would survive if Bennett and Mercer blamed each other for the loss. He struck the lantern from my hand during our struggle. Flame caught the hay near the wall. Everett ran for the barn. I am writing this because Silas has gone to fetch men, and I fear he will return with another story. Eliza stopped. Her voice failed. The room seemed to disappear around her. Her mother had written the truth while the fire was beginning. Perhaps in the ranch office. Perhaps with smoke already filling the air. Gideon took the page back. Why did she hide it here? He asked. Everett stared at the floor. She gave it to me before going inside. Gideon looked at him. You let her go. The old man's eyes filled. I went first. Then how did she give you the statement? I came out after breaking the sidebar. Sarah was in my arms. Rose had reached the office window. She pushed the papers through and told me to keep them safe. His voice broke. Then Samuel screamed. Gideon turned away. Everett continued, because stopping would have been another kind of cowardice. Rose went back in. Eliza covered her mouth. Jonah lowered his head. My father followed, he said quietly. Everett nodded. I found Daniel near the stalls. A beam fell between us. I could not reach him. The words matched Jonah's fever. I tried, I could not get him out. But Jonah had not been remembering his own failure. He had been repeating his father's. Everett looked at his son. You heard me say those words in my sleep when you were young. Jonah's face tightened. I thought they were mine. You were 9 years old. You were not there. But I dreamed it. Because grief can hand children memories that do not belong to them. For the first time, Jonah looked less like a wounded cowboy and more like the boy he had once been. Eliza wanted to reach for him. She did not. Not yet. Gideon looked at Rose's statement. Why did you hide this? Everett closed his eyes. Silas returned with men before the fire was out. He said Gideon had seen my horse. He said the town would believe I caused it. He threatened Jonah. Jonah stared at him. What? You were asleep at home. He said if I spoke, another Mercer child might vanish. Silas laughed harshly. You expect them to believe that? Everett looked at him. You knew exactly where Jonah slept. The laugh ended. Gideon stepped toward Silas. You threatened a child. Silas's eyes hardened. I kept the valley from tearing itself apart. You built the hatred that tore it apart. The hatred was already there. No, Eliza said, you fed it because it paid you. Silas looked at her. For the first time, he seemed old. Not weak. Just exposed. I did what men do when land is being taken from them. The land was never yours, Jonah said. Silas glanced toward the door again. Then came the sound of horses outside. Several. The ranch hand's voice called from the yard. Sheriff. Silas's face changed. Gideon looked toward Eliza. Did you send anyone? She shook her head. The old ranch hand appeared in the doorway. Behind him stood Sheriff Wade Hollies and 2 deputies. I saw Boone ride in armed, the ranch hand said. Sent Tommy through the east pasture. The sheriff entered. His gaze took in the pistols, broken furniture, scattered papers, and blood on Jonah's bandage. What happened? Gideon handed him Rose's statement. Read this. Silas moved suddenly. He shoved the table toward Eliza and ran for the kitchen door. A deputy caught him before he reached it. Silas fought once, then stopped when Sheriff Hollies drew his weapon. The handcuffs closed around his wrists. No one cheered. No one spoke. The truth did not feel victorious. It felt heavy. As Silas was led outside, he looked back at Gideon. You needed someone to blame. Gideon held Rose's statement against his chest. Yes, he said, and you made certain I chose the wrong man. Silas disappeared through the door. The room fell quiet. Everett sat beside the fireplace. Gideon stood across from him. For 19 years, hatred had kept both men alive in the shape they understood. Now there was nothing between them except grief. Gideon looked at the old Mercer. My wife died helping your children. Everett nodded. My children died beside your son. Gideon's mouth trembled. You could have told me. I was afraid. So was I. Everett looked up. Gideon's voice cracked. But I turned fear into hatred and gave it to my daughter. Everett looked toward Jonah. And I turned mine into silence and gave it to my son. Eliza felt tears burn her eyes. Jonah pushed himself to his feet. He swayed. She reached him before he fell. This time he did not pull away. His good hand rested lightly against her arm. Gideon watched them. The old anger tried to rise in his face. Then he looked at Rose's letter. Something inside him softened. Not fully. Not easily. But enough. We need a doctor, he said. Jonah gave a weak smile. Eliza has been saying that since yesterday. She was right yesterday. Eliza looked at her father. That is the first sensible thing you have said since entering the cabin. For one startled second, Everett laughed. It was a small sound. Broken by grief. But real. Even Gideon's mouth moved slightly. Outside, the sheriff prepared to take Silas Boone back to Dry River. Inside, the 2 fathers stood among the remains of a 19-year lie. The truth had finally come. But truth alone could not restore the dead, rebuild trust, or teach wounded hearts how to live without hatred. That would require something harder. It would require forgiveness. And as Eliza helped Jonah toward the door, she saw the way her father looked at Everett Mercer. The feud was over. The healing had not yet begun. The sheriff took Silas Boone away before sunset. No one in Mercer Valley celebrated. The sound of the wagon faded into the distance, leaving only the breeze moving through the cottonwoods and the quiet murmur of the creek. Justice had begun, but it did not feel like victory. Too many empty chairs waited in both homes. Dr. Harlan arrived before dusk and examined Jonah's shoulder. "You were fortunate," the old physician said while tightening a fresh bandage. "Another day of riding like that and I'd have been putting this arm back together a second time." Jonah smiled faintly. "I've been told I'm stubborn." The doctor glanced toward Eliza. "I imagine someone has already informed you." Eliza folded her arms. "Several times." Even Gideon allowed the corner of his mouth to lift for a brief moment. It was the first hint of peace either family had seen in years. The following morning, Gideon stood outside the Mercer ranch before sunrise. Everett stepped onto the porch, leaning heavily on his cane. Neither man spoke for several moments. The valley seemed to wait with them. Finally, Gideon removed his hat. "I believed the wrong story." Everett lowered his eyes. "I should have trusted you with the truth. I might not have believed it." "No, but you still should have told me." Everett nodded slowly. "I know." Gideon looked toward the old barn, where fresh boards had replaced weathered ones. 19 years is a long time. It is. It is too long to spend hating the wrong man. Everett's eyes filled. "I never stopped blaming myself. You should not have carried it alone." Neither man offered a handshake. Not yet. Instead, they stood together beside the morning light, both understanding that forgiveness rarely arrived in a single conversation. It arrived one honest day at a time. Weeks passed. The county judge accepted Rose Bennett's statement, the signed water agreement, and the recovered documents into the official record. Silas Boone confessed to moving the boundary markers, chaining the barn doors, destroying evidence, and allowing both families to believe a lie that protected his control over the creek. His sentence could never restore what had been lost. But the truth finally belonged to everyone. The old feud officially ended. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Snow melted from the hills. The disputed creek flowed stronger than anyone remembered. One bright April morning, Gideon rode to the stone bridge carrying a bundle of young apple saplings. Everett arrived from the south with Jonah beside him. Eliza looked from one family to the other. No rifles. No angry words. Only shovels. Gideon looked toward the grassy bank beside the water. Rose wanted this creek to bring people together. Everett nodded. "Then let us begin here." They planted 4 trees. One for Rose Bennett. One for Samuel Bennett. One for Sarah Mercer. One for Daniel Mercer. When the last roots were covered, Eliza placed a smooth river stone beside each young tree. No speeches were needed. The wind carried enough memories for everyone. Over the next months, Bennett and Mercer hands repaired broken fences together. The shared water agreement that Rose had dreamed of was finally signed beneath the same cottonwoods where the old argument had begun. Small ranchers no longer paid unfair fees. The valley slowly changed. Children crossed the creek without being warned to stay on one side. Neighbors began speaking names they had avoided for nearly 2 decades. Even the old stone bridge, abandoned for years, filled again with wagon tracks. Jonah spent much of the summer helping Gideon repair the northern pasture. His shoulder healed steadily, though Eliza still scolded him whenever he tried lifting fence posts too soon. "You never listen," she said one afternoon. "I listen. You simply ignore good advice." "I only ignore yours." She laughed. "So you admit it." "I admit I enjoy hearing you repeat it." She shook her head. "You truly are impossible. Yet you keep bringing me lunch. Someone has to make sure you remember to eat." He looked at her with quiet warmth. I was hoping that was the reason. Eliza felt her cheeks grow warm. She looked away toward the horses grazing nearby. Some feelings needed no grand declaration. They simply grew day after day, like strong roots beneath good soil. Late that autumn, Jonah rode with Eliza to the hill overlooking both ranches. The creek shimmered below them. The 4 young apple trees had already begun to take hold. Jonah removed a small velvet pouch from his coat. I carried this for weeks. Eliza smiled. I wondered when you would find the courage. You knew. I suspected. He opened the pouch. Inside rested a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. It isn't expensive. I never asked for expensive. It belonged to my mother. He hesitated. She once told me that the strongest homes are built by people willing to tell each other the truth. He looked directly into Eliza's eyes. I cannot promise an easy life. I know. I cannot promise there will never be sorrow. I know that too. But I promise there will never again be silence where truth belongs. He took a careful breath. Eliza Bennett, will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes before she answered. Yes. Nothing more was needed. The valley itself seemed to breathe with them. Their wedding took place the following spring beside the creek. Not on Bennett land. Not on Mercer land. But exactly where the water crossed both. Gideon stood beside Everett. Neither man had become the other's closest friend. Some wounds leave lasting scars. But they had become something stronger than enemies. They had become honest neighbors. When Gideon placed Eliza's hand into Jonah's, he looked at the young cowboy for a long moment. Take care of her. I will. And if you fail... Jonah smiled. I know exactly where you'll find me. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Gideon laughed. A real laugh. One that carried across the creek. Everett smiled through quiet tears. Rose would have liked this day, he whispered. Gideon looked toward the 4 young apple trees. She never stopped believing people could choose kindness. No. And today, she was finally proven right. Years later, travelers passing through the valley often stopped beside the creek to rest their horses beneath 4 broad apple trees. The oldest ranchers would tell them the same story. Not about hatred, not about the fire, but about a young ranch woman who found an injured stranger beside her fence and chose compassion before she knew his name. They would say that one act of mercy uncovered 19 years of hidden truth. They would say that justice finally came because courage refused to remain silent. And every autumn, when the apple branches bent beneath bright red fruit, children from both the Bennett and Mercer ranches gathered beneath their shade without knowing which side of the creek their grandparents had once called enemy ground. Perhaps that was the greatest healing of all. If this ending touched your heart, thank you for staying until the final page of this Wild West journey. Sometimes the strongest frontier stories are not about the fastest gun, but about the brave choice to replace generations of silence with truth, mercy, and hope.